Hey folks, Nathan here. We're looking at another Kickstarter game this time to do another of our content overviews. This is the game Siegestorm, or more appropriately, Siegestorm the Siege Mode, which is a Kickstarter for the game Siegestorm that actually has sort of a precursor to it that was already out there for a little while. The company behind this is Awaken Realms Lite. You have the main Awaken Realms. They're the team behind things like Lords of Hellas, Nemesis, Tainted Grail, and so forth. And then you have a smaller group within the same company called Awaken Realms Lite. They're the ones behind this Siegestorm Kickstarter. However, this actually began with a smaller version of the game. This one, just regularly called Siegestorm. This version of Siegestorm was provided as a gift for those who backed Lords of Hellas or The Edge Downfall. What the Siegestorm Kickstarter did was it jumped in and added new game modes, new factions, new mechanics, a solo mode, a co-op mode, and so on, and really just built upon the foundation that this original game had laid. There are some slight differences in rules. We'll hit those as we go along. We're not going to make this a how-to-play guide. It's more about a content overview. But as we go along, there are certain things that I'll point out for those who are curious about how it does differ, in case you might happen to have a copy of the original Siegestorm or are looking for a copy of the original Siegestorm. Spoiler warning, you don't really need to hunt this down if you got certain levels of the Kickstarter for Siegestorm Siege Mode. For the sake of comparison, here are the two games side by side. As you can tell, Siegestorm Siege Mode is a much bigger game. Essentially, most of the contents are duplicated, however, at least from this to this, not the other way around. Now that we have our size comparisons out of the way, I'm going to try to use this playmat, albeit with a little bit of reflection over here, I apologize for that, so that we can see Siegestorm with a Siegestorm background. There were multiple versions of Siegestorm playmats that were available within the Kickstarter for Siegestorm Siege Mode. They were all £25. It is a company that goes by British pounds when it comes to their currency. And I chose the one that actually represents factions found in both versions of the game, the new version and the old version. The factions in question are Styxia and Seraphia, or Seraphia. I've never quite figured out how to correctly pronounce that one. Now, the original game, again, that was presented as a gift, not purchasable separately unless you did like I did and jumped on eBay and found someone selling a copy, had a small game box, had, instead of a full-blown rulebook, a quick start guide that essentially just folds out and gives you all the rules of play. It also had a website registration card where you would go onto their website, register to find other people playing, and enter a specific code. They have done away with the codes, although the website still exists at this point. It included 56 cards each for the two factions involved, Seraphia, or Seraphia, and Styxia. It included help cards that were identical for either one. I'm showing you one side and the other side, but they're just thematically colored like these, but has the same information on both. We had 3 cards to create what's referred to as the war track. Okay, we're going to take a look at how that exactly works when we see the main game, and we'll compare it to these at that time. And then we have 3 cards that are basically just the logo and the web address on the back, and then one image of one of the characters, one of the individuals in the game, with the web address on that one as well. So a relatively basic set that lets you start playing Siegestorm with, again, kind of an earlier version of the rules. 56 cards on either side, building card decks of 34 per faction, so that each player starts out with a total of 34. We'll see why there's 56 instead of just 34 here in a little bit when we look at the main box. Now, I would note here, before we look at the Kickstarter content, that just like any of the games from Awaken Realms, you have a special thanks letter from the person most responsible for this particular game, along with information on the back about how to deal with things like, damaged items or missing elements and stuff like that. Basically, support instructions. This here is our base game. Whether you got the core box, the legendary pledge, or the gameplay all in, you would have this box regardless. It's just a question of whether you had other stuff to go along with it and what is actually in the box. We'll start out with what the core box pledge was, which was £22, or you could do a group pledge of 6 of these for £119. You, of course, have your manual, your rule reference. Now, the cool thing about this, aside from just the fact that the game has been updated, is the fact that it's not just the regular PvP 1 versus 1 type mode that you got with the original game that was the gift, the so-called dual mode as they call it now. There's also instructions for a solo mode with special cards and everything for it, quite a few special cards actually, where it's one player versus a boss, an AI type of boss with an AI deck. We have a co-op mode, also going up against the same boss. There is a last man standing 3 or 4 player mode, and essentially a free-for-all mode to go with it. So a lot more variance in how you can play when you've got the Kickstarter version of the game, or at least the one that's dedicated to a Kickstarter as opposed to being a gift from a Kickstarter. That's going to get really confusing really fast, so I'll just call it old and new. Now, as we delve into this box's content beyond the rulebook, we should start with the free gifts. As always, Awaken Realms said thank you to backers by providing a couple of special little items to say thank you and to preview something that is upcoming from them, in this case from Awaken Realms Lite. Just like the original Siegestorm was a gift for the same purpose back in Lords of Hellas and the Edge Downfall. Here, the 2 gifts were a Siegestorm Kickstarter exclusive coin that basically you can flip to determine who goes first and that sort of thing. So it is a little bit unusual that it's actually a gift that actually ties into the game that you've purchased, but that's one of the 2 items. The next was a set of cards for an upcoming game called The Breaking News, the fantasy edition of it. These are cards you can't use yet, but you would use with the Breaking News game if you wind up picking it up. It has a little card here, same back, that just says, with real news being so ridiculous, Awaken Realms Lite created The Breaking News, a satirical party game. Please enjoy this little gift. We thought you might enjoy a fantasy promo pack that can be combined with the base game, launching in 2019. Though, here we are halfway through 2019, we haven't really heard anything more about The Breaking News yet. But you have cards with them, which we don't really know what to do with, but we have What? Not This Time, Brutal Fact, So Sweet, Apocalyptic News, Secret Knowledge, and Most Explicit News. Again, we have no idea what these actually do. We'll have to wait till we have the Breaking News game, but all those characters, all that art, is going to be coming from Siegestorm. The game itself has a nice plastic insert that holds everything very well, including all the expansion content that came with the first Kickstarter, depending on which level you went with, so everything can fit except for, of course, your playmat. And in this case, the plastic insert was a stretch goal at the 71,000 pound mark. Before we delve into the cards, let's look at what else is in the box that is some other type of component here. If you're playing the solo or co-op mode, you're going to need to be able to take out a boss and have a way of measuring its health. For that, you have a boss life counter here known as the Siege Meter. It's basically just some pieces from the punch board you put together with these little screw-in items. It actually rolls pretty well. It's one of the better designed rotating dials that I've actually seen in a board game thus far, or a tabletop game. Initially, you were going to have 50 plus tokens. Instead, it wound up being closer to more like 30 plus. We've got tokens here known as spirit tokens. You have a total of 4 that represent 3 each, and then 9 that represent 1 each. You'll use these predominantly within the solo or co-op mode against a boss. You then have so-called gang tokens. You have 3 that are worth 5, and then you have a total of 12 that are worth 1 each, again, for that solo or co-op mode against a boss. You have what's called the reserve token. Now, this is the same on either side. Basically, when you're playing against a boss in solo or co-op, any cards that the boss can't play yet don't just get tossed aside. They get put into what's called the reserve pile. And essentially, once the boss runs out of his regular deck, you shuffle the reserve pile and it becomes the next deck for him, but it can only do it once. They initially were going to have whether or not it had been used represented by this token having either this side or a blue side. The rulebook still reflects the idea of having sort of a reddish-orange side and a blue side, but they got rid of that mechanic to just have this token with the same art on either side, where basically while this is out, he hasn't used it. When you take it away, he has used it. Same mechanic, but The fact that the rulebook refers to this as two sides with two different colors has confused a lot of people. When you are dealing with a boss in solo or co-op mode, you're going to need to keep track of what's referred to as the menace level. And you just use this little token here on a board to track it. Very small, very easy to lose, keep track of it. To assist with organization, the 81,000 pound stretch goal was a set of 10 dividers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now you notice none of these actually say names up at the top. The original plan was to have a different divider for each of the different factions that you'll have within the game, which would make sense, but which would also require there to be 11 of them. Instead, they figured you might be making your own custom decks, so perhaps instead you'd want to store it by your deck, not faction, so they gave you these blank ones here that you could write the name of your decks on if you wanted to create your own name. This led to some confusion, though, because that means that we basically have 10 dividers with art from 10 of the 11 factions in the game, which caused a lot of people to wonder where the Goblin divider is. There wasn't one. There wasn't really supposed to be one as soon as they switched to 10 that you label yourself instead of making it faction by faction, but another thing that's confused a lot of people. We then have one so-called boss board. It is double-sided, same information, just different color schemes here. Basically, you're going to fight a boss that has a boss card with some specifics on it. That will go here. You'll use that little skull token I showed you a moment ago to track the menace level. This basically tells you the cost of cards of that number or lower that the boss can actually play from its deck. It gives you a breakdown of the boss's turn and the player's turn as well. All nice and neat there. I would note here, since we are going to draw the comparisons, that the player's turn has a step here of number 5. It goes prepare, draw, advance war track, deploy, extra turn, end turn. The extra turn mechanic is something that was added later on when we got the Kickstarter version of the game, the new version of the game. So in the old version, there is no extra turn step because it just didn't happen. Then we have 4 battle zone boards. Now, originally it was meant to just be 2 because it was just going to be a 2-player game. Even if you were playing solo or co-op, it was a maximum of 2. Solo co-op is kind of the same game mode, just with a different number of players, so I kind of lumped those together. At the 150,000 pound stretch goal mark, though, they doubled that number so you could play 3 or 4-player games as well. Now, these are part of what makes the game's mechanics a little different. You see, the way it works is that you open up one of these, and there's 2 different possible color schemes, again, and you have what are referred to as the front line, the no man's land, and the front line. And you lay them down like this. And essentially, when you deploy cards, when you deploy creatures, characters, whatever, to be able to go after the enemy, they're going to advance along a track. They're going to deploy beside your front line on your side. And as the game progresses, as you go from turn to turn, you have a movement along your war track where everything kind of gets pushed up once per turn. So you would move from here to here, from here to here. And then when the time comes to be pushed off the other end, you have several options of what you can do. You can storm, which means basically you attack the other player, or you attack an enemy card that's sitting in frontline or no man's land. Or you can do what's called holding ground, which is to jump into either the front line or the no man's land and stay there, which does have a benefit we'll talk about momentarily here. Or the card can become a support card. Basically, when you play cards, you have to pay a cost. And typically, you have to pay that cost by discarding cards from your hand, which can make playing cards early on kind of a big gamble of which card you should play. But once a card goes off that end, if you decide to make them support, they sit down in a little support row next to your side of the table and can simply be turned sideways or tapped or exhausted, whatever you want to call it, to count as 1 towards that cost instead of having to discard anything from your hand, which is nice. So essentially you have 3 spots where cards can be played on your side, 3 spots for it to be played on their side, and then when you hold ground, if there's an opening, or if you want to replace one of your cards that's already there, you've got your front line places they could go, or both sides could put cards into that no man's land, but only one can be there at a time. This is one of the ways in which the new game is a little fancier in its style than what we got with the original, because the original did this with cards, so it could all fit in that same box. So you had a card called No Man's Land card, and you basically set it down. You had a frontline card for Styxia faction, so okay, you're gonna stick it over here, sort of match up the colors. And then the same thing for Seraphia, and each one says top of opponent's track and points a direction, deployment zone and defender points the other direction. And you got the No Man's Land has the arrows telling you which direction cards are going. So in essence, the player on this side, whatever card, I move this out of the way, whatever card is sitting here, or again, same thing, sitting on the other side of this one, that's the one you're deploying. That's also the one that if there's one sitting there, that's the one that can defend you if you are attacked. Then they go forward. When they wind up over here, that's the top of the opponent's track, it says, right? Which means that's the last place they're going to be before they actually storm or hold ground or support, because they're about to zip off the edge there. So the original game just used these cards, but while they're not as fancy as a nice board, the board doesn't actually tell you anything other than the names of the slots. It's the rules you need to read to remember what goes where. In this case, from the original game, using those cards actually provides you a help of sorts as you're playing to remind you of what goes where, which is actually kind of cool, at least for a game when it's first starting out. Though at this point, this game is complex enough that you would assume that everybody should be reading and knowing the rules first, and maybe won't need that kind of guide most of the time. All right, now we can look at the actual cards. Now, you may recall that I said that the original Siegestorm game, the small one as a gift, came with Seraphia and Styxia. Those are the names of the factions. 56 cards each. The decks originally for this new version of the game were supposed to have 54 cards each, but they all got bumped up to 56 total, which wound up matching the same number as in the other game. Now, again, there's only 34 cards in your deck at any given time, so there's a reason why you have more. If you did just the core box pledge, you got the regular starter set for this new version of Siegestorm, and you did not get Seraphia or Styxia as your factions. Instead, there were two brand new factions. The first is referred to as, I'm not sure if it's Yrsa or Yrsa, how you're supposed to pronounce this. Y-R-S-A, I think it's Yrsa. That's how I've always pronounced it. And you'll notice kind of a cool card back here. We're going to find that all the different factions have different card backs, which makes it kind of tricky when sometimes you're able to steal cards from other factions and bring them into your deck, because you're going to know what's coming up. It eliminates some of the information that you don't have as you're playing, which is a little bit odd. In fact, for tournament play, they pretty much say you have to have sleeves. They did offer sleeves as an add-on. For £2, you could get Percival Paladin sleeves, but I didn't get any of those. And they actually were going to have some really cool printed protectors, 50 white and 50 black, just for £9, which is kind of nice, which would have worked with any of these decks and hidden their backs, except there wasn't enough interest in that, so they never wound up getting produced. Now, what makes Siegestorm somewhat of a unique game, aside from just the whole war track battle zone type of gameplay, where there's those specific positions and whatnot, is the way the cards are dealt with. Every card has a cost, a name, you've got an action, a passive, an attack value, originally called an attack ratio in the original game, a defense value, originally called a defense ratio, a rarity, sort of. It was originally meant to be a collectible card game, but they decided not to go that route, so there's not random booster packs or anything, but you have a symbol down here that determines what rarity that card is in terms of, is it a soldier, is it a veteran, is it an elite, or is it a champion? You can have 4 of any soldier or veteran in your deck. You can only have 2 of any elite or champion in your deck. And then you have this weird little symbol here, okay? That symbol, depending on what color it is and the shape of it, tells you where this card is coming from. A white sort of swirly symbol here is what used to be called an extended deck card, what is now called instead a base card. Basically, it's with your original purchase, of those 56 cards for that particular faction, but it's not in the regular starter deck. They provided you with extra cards beyond the original starter deck so you can do some customizing of your own without having to buy anything else. So this is one of those cards provided so that you could do that. If that symbol were green instead of white, it'd be telling me it's in the starter deck if you want to just play with pre-constructed 34 card decks. There's another symbol we'll see later that comes from a supplement. All right, but what's interesting about it is, notice the cost there, but there's not a card type on here anywhere. There's no such thing as different card types in Siegestorm. Every single card is going to have a cost, attack value, defense value. Attack value going after other players' creatures, going after the other player themselves. A defense value to protect you or to avoid itself being killed. A cost for when you deploy it or spend the cost to use it in some other form, and 2 different ways it can be used. You can use every card as an action. Pay the cost, use it, discard it to what's referred to as your casualties pile, basically your discard pile. Then you have a passive ability. When this card is actually out there in one of those 3 spaces, or if you had it hold ground in the front line or no man's land, its passive stays active the entire time. So you have to sort of decide which is the best use of any of your cards. Deploy it and use its passive, but not be able to use it as an action, or use the action, but not get the benefit of putting him out there with a passive ability. Every card is like that, giving you 2 options for how every card is played. Every faction has now been given its own specialized help card, with information about what it does specifically, leaving out the stuff that may not apply to that faction. Then we have our starting cards. 34 cards in a pre-constructed starter deck. Notice the same symbol, but it is green. For Yrsa, we have Underworld Vindicator, ×3. Reclusive Web Spinner, ×2. Gutter Crawler, ×3. Brainwashed Traitor, ×3. Reptine Rider, Grand Overlord Ike, Web Spinner Matriarch, ×2. Golachemist, ×2. False Prophet, ×2. Despoiler, ×2. Chemtrail Belcher, ×2. Reptine Blade Master, ×3. Reptine Taskmaster, Knight of the New World Order, Saboteur, Sora, Mistress of Deceit, Underworld Kaiju, yikes, Toxic Dragon, Underworld Angel, and Ratkin Plaguebringer. Then you have your base cards that are included in the 56 but not in the starter, which you can use to customize without having to buy anything else. We have Underworld Vindicator ×1, Reclusive Web Spinner ×1, Reptine Rider ×1, Grand Overlord Ike ×1, Underworld Protector 1, 2, 3, Nameless Cryptid 1, 2, 3, Web Spinner Matriarch again 1, Golachemist 1, Despoiler 2, Chemtrail Belcher 1, Reptine Taskmaster 1, Knight of the New World Order 1, Underworld Kaiju 1, Underworld Angel 1, Wrecker, and Ratkin Plaguebringer again. That's just one faction though. Then you have Kung Lai. Again, you have a help card specific to that faction. We have 34 starter cards, as always. Lay the Enlightened, Merciless Dancer, Armored Yak ×3, Warrior of Shambhala ×3, Rolang Servant ×3, Drook Master, not Drunken Master, but Drook Master ×2, Retired Master ×2, Drook School Adept ×2, Spirit of Justice, Ruthless Instructor ×3, Wind Spirit ×2, Shongmao Savager, if I'm saying that right, ×2, Lungta School Adept ×2, Lungta Master, Ancient Dragon, Me Te Master ×2, Warden of the Sacred Scroll, and 2 copies of Tengu. You notice there the costs were lower for many of those especially the higher end cards. They don't get quite as expensive as the ones in Yrsa, so you wind up with one of the elements of strategy for that particular faction. Then we have our base cards, the ones that are included to get us up to 56 to allow you to customize. We have another Warrior of Shambhala, another Armored Yak, Guardian of Shambhala ×2, Mete School Adept ×2, Druk Master ×1, Retired Master 1, Snow Lion ×2, Druk School Adept 1, Spirit of Balance 2, Spirit of Justice, Wind Spirit, Shungmao Savager, Lungta School Adept, Lungta Master, Garuda Cavalry ×2, Warden of the Sacred Scroll, and Mete Master. Now again, one of the key features of this new version of the game is the fact that you can play solo and co-op, not just PvP. So we have 2 AI decks included in the game that allow you to basically control the actions of the boss for that type of game. The first of these is the Evil Goblins deck. You have a help card again, specifics for Evil Goblins. And the Evil Goblins one is a basic AI deck, as it's called, so it includes a boss. And the boss that actually is in the main box is harder than the one you get from one of the paid expansions, because it's Bylos, the Goblin King, and the only difficulty levels are medium, hard, or very hard. It tells you the difficulty in the corner, his name, victory conditions for you, menace level effects relating to how the menace level can raise aside from the normal way. 5 is going to tell you how many cards the boss has in his hand on any turn, how much he draws up to. And this weird back that looks kind of like it's written in code, this tells you the starting menace level. This tells you the number of cards in the deck initially from a basic AI deck and an advanced AI deck, because you'll have one deck of each type combined every time you play solo or co-op. And then the starting health on that little dial I showed you earlier, the siege meter for that boss. And it gives you 2 different values over on the side for solo or co-op. Then your AI deck cards are going to have a cost and a name, may have an attack value, a defense value, may have a passive, may have an action, may have neither, may have both, just whatever fits that particular card. Has a command action up here to tell you essentially the order in which this takes precedence as the boss is playing their cards, and may have a special action symbol over here to do something special. This one does not. But the Evil Goblins AI faction has Goblin Leader ×4, Goblin Tank ×4, Goblin Killer ×4, Goblin Archer ×4, and there's a pattern here, Goblin Knight ×4, Dragon Fury, which is an action here, so no attack or defense value and whatnot here. Dragon Fury ×2. Then Transmuted Goblin, which also has one of those special action symbols here for shielded, ×2. And yes, if you're counting, that does mean that an AI deck is typically going to be a total of 24 cards for that boss's deck. And if it's a basic AI deck, it's also going to include a boss with 3 different difficulty levels on 3 different cards, plus their help card. So 27 cards in the help card, or 28 total, if you count the help card. Now also in the box is 1 advanced AI deck, so you can combine this with Evil Goblins and be able to play 1 scenario for solo or co-op. That is the Spectral Shamans. Again, they have a help card, and then no bosses, no boss cards, because those are only in the basic AI decks, and this one is advanced, hence gold instead of that sort of, blunted silver. We have Seal of Haste, ×3. Restoration Totem, ×3. Seal of Madness, ×2. Shaman Berserker, ×4. Destruction Totem, ×3. Seal of Nova, ×3. Spiritual Shaman, ×2. Death Totem, ×2. Totemic Golem, ×2. Now, originally, that was going to be it for your starter box. But of course, there will be stretch goals added, and this was just the base level of pledge. If you chose instead to pledge 30 pounds instead of 22 pounds, or 161 instead of 119 to get a total of 6 copies as a group buy, you could get the Legendary Pledge. And that one adds in the 2 factions that were already in that original game, that older gift version, with identical cards to that version. Let me say that again. The cards for the Legendary Pledge for the Styxia and Seraphia factions are identical to the cards in the original gift game. There is no need to go and hunt down the original game unless you just want it as a curiosity. All of the Styxia and Seraphia cards from that one are in here unchanged. The only difference you'll find is, of course, you don't have the cards that make this up because you have 4 of these, the Battle Zone boards. You don't have the advertising, and your help cards are going to be faction specific. The first of those 2 factions is Styxia. So we start with the Styxia help card. Then the cards for the Styxia starter deck. Again, identical between this version and the old one. We have Zombie ×3. We have Fire Elemental ×3. Blood Cultist ×3. Goblin Mercenary ×1. Lesser Demon ×1. Banshee 1. Shadow 2. Blood Shaman 2. Demon 2. Summoner 2. Succubus 2. And I would note that they had a mini bust of the Succubus design. There was something that they had as a paid add-on. I don't recall the cost off the top of my head, and they've since removed it from the website because you can't order it anymore, but is not something that I wound up purchasing as part of my pledge. We then continue with Warlock ×2, Black Magician ×2, Imp, Berserker, Shadow Prime, Master of Elements, Death Dragon, Fire Dragon, Frost Dragon, and Dragon Lord. Then you have your base cards in case you want to take the starter cards with the base cards and customize for yourself without buying anything else. We have Zombie ×1, new card there, Necromancer ×3, Shadow 1, Lesser Demon 2, Banshee 2, Goblin Mercenary 2, Succubus again 1, Summoner 1, Shadow Prime, Imp, Berserker, Master of Elements, Abyssal Empress, new one here, 2 of those, Blood Golem, 1 of those, Fire Dragon, and Death Dragon. So you'll notice there that sometimes there are cards that are among your base cards that are not among your starter cards, meaning the only way to play with them is to customize your deck. You won't ever see them in a starter deck pre-constructed game. The second of those 2 original factions, now in the Legendary Pledge, is Seraphia. We again have a help card just for them. This does note something that's a little bit different. One of the things you see Seraphia able to do quite a bit is healing. Healing works differently in the new game than in the old game. In the old game, when you healed, basically you were just able to take cards from your casualties, right? So cards from the place where you've discarded cards that you're not usually able to get back, and just put them back into your resources, which is your stack of cards you can draw from and such, that if you run out, you lose the game. Okay? Now, rather than just putting it back in there so that it can be used not only as health, but also to draw those cards again, basically, and when you do something that heals you, you set aside those cards out of your casualties off to the side as sort of a separate damage-soaking stack. And when you receive damage, you get rid of those first before you get rid of ones from your resources. So they're still used to help you with health, but not overpowered in the sense that you can just constantly bring the same cards back in if you want to use them again. For Seraphia, we have Old Paladin in the starter cards, ×3, Protector, 3 again, Scout, 3 again, Stag Rider, 3, Wind Wizard, Fire Wizard, Alchemist twice, Guardian of Time, Assassin twice, Battle Priest, Healing Golem twice, Angelic Emissary twice, Purge Doctor, Protective Field, Fountain Guard, Shifter, Griffin Cavalry, Commander, Sky Guardian, Angel of Mercy, Angel of Fury, and Archangel. Then for your base cards to customize with, we have another of Scout, Fire Wizard, Wind Wizard, 2 of a new card, Keeper of Secrets there, Battle Priest, Healing Golem, Angelic Emissary, Guardian of Time, Purge Doctor ×2, Protective Field ×2, Fountain Guard, Shifter, Griffin Cavalry ×2, Commander, Sky Guardian, Angel of Justice, Angel of Fury, and Angel of Mercy. And yeah, that's what you were supposed to get with the Legendary Pledge, but again, there are stretch goals involved. So, everybody, regardless of their pledge level, would get the stretch goals. The stretch goals in this case included, among other things, a brand new PvP faction, so another group that you could play as yourself, either against other players or against the boss. It was revealed in 6 cards each at the 129, 134, 139, 144, 149, 154, 159, 164, and 169,000 pound stretch goals. Actually, the last 2 of those stretch goals were not met, but they provided those cards anyway to get a total of 54, and then still boosted it up to 56 to match the other PvP factions. They're pretty good about doing right by their backers. That faction that was unlocked with all those different stretch goals bit by bit is the Gunslingers, a very steampunk kind of faction. They too get a help card. Then our starter cards. Pickpocket Brody ×2, Rick the Greedy ×3, Wesley Smokes 2, Wild Hunter 2, Leo the Martin 3, Machinist 2, Prototype Smasher 2, Robbie Robber 1, Mad Andy 2, Masked McOrder 2, Smashing John, Walton Jr. ×2, Prototype Supply Train ×2, Deadeye John, Bulletproof Ryan, Prototype Machine, Prototype Spider ×2, Whispering Melanie, Prototype Hunter, and Prototype Dragon. Then your base cards, again white instead of green. We have Rick the Greedy ×1, Wesley Smokes 1, Wild Hunter 2, Leo the Martin 1, Machinist 2, Mad Andy 1, Smashing John 1, Walton Jr. 1, Black Eye Rose, new card there, ×2, Deadeye John, Bulletproof Ryan, Prototype Machine, Whispering Melody, Prototype Hunter ×2, Prototype Aircraft ×2, Unnamed ×2. And again, that faction is in your box, whether it's core box or legendary pledge. There was another stretch goal that was a deck. This one was an AI deck to go along with Evil Goblins over there and Spectral Shamans. This was Undead Realms. Their card back there. And of course, they have themselves a help card. For what it's worth, Undead Realms is an advanced AI deck. So no bosses here, but you could use this in place of Spectral Shamans with Evil Goblins to play solo or co-op. So we have Miner ×3. We have Red Girl ×4. Awakened Miner ×3. Fungor ×4. Heartless ×2. Awakened Red Girl ×2. Tainted Miracle, weird unicorn zombie there, ×4. Awakened Fungor ×2. Again, 24 cards in each of these. There are other stretch goals to look at that are in everybody's core boxes, but it's better to go ahead and look at the paid add-ons first, because some of those stretch goals actually apply with them as well. You see, when the time came for the stretch goals for the Undead Realms and the Gunslingers decks, the community was actually asked to decide between 2 different factions each time. One became the stretch goal, the other became a paid add-on. So you could still get them if you did the gameplay all-in pledge, which was everything in Legendary, plus the 2 paid add-ons and a so-called PvP supplement we'll see momentarily, which gave you more cards to customize with. The faction that lost out to Undead Realms could have been purchased for £5 or as part of the gameplay all-in pledge. It was Wild Fairies. Because it's a paid add-on, even if you got it as gameplay all-in, it comes in this little box instead of being inside your core box. Whereas the difference between core box and legendary is just what's in the core box. Just like all the others, Wild Fairies has their help card, but more importantly, it is a basic AI deck, which means we get another boss with 3 cards for 3 different difficulty levels. And this time with Niriki, we get easy, medium, and hard. Then we have the regular 24 cards. Forest Brownie, times 4. Forest Imp, times 3. Wild Lady, times 3. Battle Beetle, times 4. Forest Devil, times 3. Vine Attack, times 4. Guard Stance, times 3. And of course, they do have their own unique back, just like the others. When the Gunslingers were chosen as the PvP stretch goal deck, Frost Giants were the ones who lost out, so they became a paid add-on at £7. So we have their help card. Then we have their starter deck with Glacial Puffin, times 2. Ice Sentinel, times 3. Glacial Smasher, times 2. Cold Heart Warrior, times 2. Frostbite Angel, times 2. Cold Heart Thundercaller, Ice Spirit, times 2. Ice Belcher, times 2. Cold Heart Hunter, times 2. Cold Heart Shaman, 2. Yrsa Frostwish, not Elsa, but Yrsa. Shardmaster, times 3. Glacial Dragon, Cold Heart Wanderer, Knight of the Frozen Wastes, times 3. Glacial Intruder, Wandering Glacier, Glacial Aphid, Icewind Glider, and Iceworm. Then, of course, we have their base cards to let you customize. Ice Sentinel, Glacial Puffin, Cold Heart Thundercaller, Glacial Smasher, Ice Spirit, times 2. Ice Belcher, times 2. Shardmaster, Cold Heart Hunter, Cold Heart Shaman, Yrsa Frostwitch, Knight of the Frozen Wastes, Cold Heart Wanderer, times 2. Cold Heart Charger, times 3. Glacial Aphid, Wandering Glacier, Glacial Intruder, and Iceworm. And again, a unique card back. Now, before we look at the one other item that is in the all-in pledge, it behooves us to look at an item that was paid or free, depending on whether you were a first 24-hour backer. If you were a backer in the first 24 hours, usually Awaken Realms gives you something free that's then made as a paid add-on for everyone else. So it's not exclusive to just those first 24-hour backers, they just get to save some cash on it. Because of that, though, since I don't want to duplicate it for the all-in pledge, it's never included in whatever the all-in pledge is for that Kickstarter. So, if you were a first 24-hour backer, you got an extra PvE faction, an AI faction, for free called Shade Slayers. Otherwise, you could just spend £5 and get it that way. That's what I did. So again, they get their own little box. They have their own help card. And these actually play a little bit differently. This is the card back. There is no card back that looks like any of those. This is the card back. Okay? You play it simply as a Shade Slayer when it's first deployed. But as soon as the player receives any damage, that shade symbol there activates, and all the ones with the shade symbol flip upside down to reveal their sort of true nature, so to speak. So they start out all as Shade Slayer, cost of 1, 2 attack, 2 defense. Notice this is an advanced deck, so this would be one that you would mix in with either Wild Fairies or Evil Goblins. The options here that could come up when they flip over would include Shade of Pain, times 4, Shade of Night, also 4, Shade of Destruction, 4, Shade of Madness, 4, Screaming Banshee, 4, Midnight Dancer, 4. So 6 different options, 4 cards each, but all with Shade Slayer as the back. Now, before we look at the other item for the gameplay all in, I know we're sort of putting it off, but it makes sense in a logical order here to look at something else first. We want to look at another set of stretch goals. Within the base game, for everyone, there's what's referred to as the PvP Boost expansion, which isn't an expansion per se, it's extra cards for each faction that were unlocked by stretch goals to give you more customization ability with some more cool cards. Initially, the idea was that they unlocked cards 3 cards at a time. 3 for Styxia, then another 3 for Styxia at the 12,000 and 19,000 pound stretch goals. Then 3 and 3 for Kung Lai at 26,000 and 33,000. 3 and 3 for Seraphia at 40,000 and 47,000. And 3 and 3 for Yrsa at 54,000 and 61,000. And pardon me if it gets a little bit confusing. I keep saying Yrsa. Sometimes I'll say Ysra. So does the material. They don't seem to have kept the spelling for that faction name consistent. So for instance, on the help card, it's YRSA. In the rulebook, it's YSRA. They flipped the 2 middle letters. Not quite sure what it's actually supposed to be. For what it's worth, the Kickstarter seems to agree with the rulebook, not the help card. So maybe it is Ysra, not Yrsa. Either way, this wound up changing though. Instead of getting 6 new cards for just those 4 factions, we got 6 new cards for Styxia because they kind of needed that to balance things out and give them some more options for that particular faction. But all the other player factions, the PvP factions, got 4 cards. But now instead of it just being the cards that were meant to be in the core box and the legendary pledge, it also included the paid add-on and the stretch goal deck. For Styxia, we got 4 copies of Great Deceiver and 2 copies of Ent Protector. For all the other factions, it was 4 copies of the same new card. So in essence, Styxia got what everyone else got, but then 2 copies of an extra. For Ysra, or Yrsa, or whatever, we got 4 copies of Toxic Crusader. Kung Lai got Ghost of Shambhala. Gunslingers got Superior Centaur. Frost Giants got Frost Soar. And then Seraphia got Soul Destroyer. Now you notice that each of these has a different symbol down at the bottom. It's white, so it's not a starter card, but it's a different symbol than either of the other 2. That makes it an expansion boost card. And again, these are in everyone's boxes, so they needed something to differentiate this specific set of cards. Now we return to the idea of the paid add-ons. You had a paid add-on for £15, or which was included in Gameplay All-In, called the PvP Supplement. This is not the PvP Boost expansion. Those were stretch goals, relatively small, and included with everybody's game because it was a stretch goal. The PvP Supplement is basically going to give you enough cards, in theory, to play with the maximum number of each type of card. Again, soldiers and veterans, 4 copies each. Elite or champions, 2 copies each. They originally billed this as 150 plus cards. It wound up, when you actually take into account all the cards needed to actually do that, once everything was balanced for the original game, to actually be 142 cards. You'll notice, by the way, that these are differentiated from the PvP Boost by just being labeled the same as base cards. So you had 18 of these for Frost Giants. Glacial Puffin, Glacial Smasher, Coldheart Warrior ×2, Coldheart Hunter, Coldheart Shaman, Coldheart Wanderer, Glacial Dragon, Coldheart Charger, Glacial Aphid ×2, Wandering Glacier ×2, Glacial Intruder ×2, Icewind Glider, and then 2 copies of Iceworm. Again, just to give you some options when deck building. For Gunslingers, it's 24. Wesley Smokes, Walter Jr., Smashing John ×2, Masked McOrder ×2, Mad Andy, Robbie Robber, Prototype Smasher ×2, Prototype Supply Train ×2, Black Eye Rose ×2, Prototype Machine ×2, Prototype Spider ×2, Prototype Hunter, Prototype Aircraft ×2, Unnamed ×2, and Prototype Dragon. It's 28 for Kung Lai, Merciless Dancer, Lay the Enlightened, Druk School Adept, Snow Lion ×2, Retired Master, Druk Master, Rolang Servant, Metes School Adept ×2, Lungsta School Adept, Zhongmao Savager, Wind Spirit, Ruthless Instructor, Spirit of Justice ×2, Spirit of Balance ×2, Ancient Dragon, Garuda Cavalry ×2, Tengu ×2, Warden of the Sacred Scroll ×2, and Mete Master. For Ysra, it's only 22. We have Brainwashed Trader, Gutter Crawler, Reclusive Web Spinner, False Prophet ×2, Underworld Protector, Nameless Cryptid, Web Spinner Matriarch, Golachemist, or however we're going to say it, Reptine Taskmaster ×2, Reptine Blade Master, Chemtrail Belcher, Knight of the New World Order ×2, Saboteur, Sora, Mistress of Deceit, Underworld Angel ×2, Toxic Dragon, Wrecker ×2. For Styxia, 24, Blood Cultist, Fire Elemental, Necromancer, Two Blood Shaman, Goblin Mercenary, Banshee, Shadow, Lesser Demon, Black Magician ×2, Demon ×2, Succubus, Summoner, Warlock ×2, Imp ×2, Berserker ×2, Blood Golem, Frost Dragon, Dragon Lord. And for Seraphia, 28, Old Paladin, Protector, Stag Rider, Wind Wizard ×2, Fire Wizard ×2, Alchemist ×2, Keeper of Secrets ×2, Protective Field, Purge Doctor, Angelic Emissary, Healing Golem, Battle Priest ×2, Assassin ×2, Fountain Guard ×2, Shifter ×2, Griffin Cavalry, Commander ×2, Angel of Justice, Archangel. There was, by the way, supposed to be a deck holder that was available for £5, but there wasn't enough interest, so they never produced it. So the box for the PvP supplement became a deck box. The last paid add-on was a £4 paid add-on of a set of foil cards known as Pay to Win. They were meant to be sort of joke cards, but they tweaked them so that they could actually be played in an open game mode if both players or all players agree to actually allow their use. They have a very obvious different back here, but again, they are foil cards here. We have Goblin Andrew ×2 and Goblin Marius ×2. Again, deal 0 damage, but when this card storms, win the game! Action, win the game! Allies have +1 defense, right? No attack or defense on either one. Notice the different symbol down there, noting that it is this sort of special weird faction with the little $sign. So kind of weird, just kind of a goofy thing that they decided to make something that it has some gameplay value if both players agree to play with them. And they're considered champions, given the symbol type there, so 2 of each is all you're ever going to need. That, by the way, marks the last of the paid add-ons outside of, again, the game mats, of which there were several options. I got one that were £25 each, and an art book for £10. I didn't get that with my original pledge. It's not part of the all-in. I did wind up purchasing it when the Pledge Manager reopened, so I'll have that someday soon and be able to show you that in a separate video. The last of the stretch goals then was to have foil cards, and it wound up with sort of some question as to which of these cards were going to be, but they were going to be Kickstarter exclusive. Now, that is to be differentiated from the so-called Kickstarter exclusive stretch goal, which was supposed to be these little Easter egg cards that had no actual gameplay value, and it's basically something that notes that, you can play this card if you were a Kickstarter backer and that sort of thing. They decided to make it a little more serious, so they actually got rid of those stretch goals, despite the fact that, in theory, they could have been included. Those stretch goals for those Kickstarter exclusive cards that reference the fact that you were a backer was a 500 shares on Facebook stretch goal. What's referred to sometimes as either a social stretch goal or a social goal. But then you had the actual Kickstarter exclusive foil cards. They unlocked one new foil card each at the £113,000 stretch goal, £115,000, £118,000, £124,000, £131,500, £136,500, £141,500, and £146,500 stretch goals. They're different than the ones that are actually shown on the campaign page once they decided which ones with community input to actually make into the foil cards. It wound up being one per PvP faction, and 2 brand new pay-to-win cards that are different than the ones actually in that pay-to-win pack. They're all foil, they are all Kickstarter exclusive. The 2 new pay-to-win faction ones are Goblin Martin. Make your top 2 casualty cards your supporters. Whenever you play an action with a cost of 6 or higher, deal 4 damage. 7, 3, okay, lower cost of 6, so not nearly as crazy overpowered and game-winning as the pay-to-win pack was. Icewind Glider got it for Frost Giants. Prototype Dragon got it for Gunslingers. Sora, Mistress of Deceit, got it for Yrsa. Ancient Dragon, got it for Kung Lai. Dragon Lord for Styxia. And Archangel for Seraphia. So, someone who got the gameplay all-in pledge and bought Shade Slayers, or got it from the first 24 hours, and bought Pay to Win, along with then the PvP supplement, had what you see here as far as cards go. What you might call a shitstorm of Siegestorm. 6 PvP decks, 5 AI decks, plus those Pay to Win cards, 6 of them that could be mixed in. 2 copies each of the 3 different ones. That is a hell of a lot of gameplay when even the gameplay all-in pledge was only £53. And then you add on top of that just possibly Pay to Win and Shade Slayers. And again, with the idea of cards being either on the board, so to speak, on the war track, or on the battle zone, as it's called, and using their passive abilities, or being used as an action, with the ability for something to be paid from your hand or from your supporters that can be tapped, the ability to have choices when your card reaches the other player, whether it's storming, holding ground, etc. And the fact that there are so many game modes and dedicated AI decks that get mixed and matched to play for solo and co-op mode, this is a hell of a lot of gameplay for what we get here and the price. I am definitely glad that I picked up Siegestorm. Now, as we close things out here, a few brief notes that I promised on the differences between the original game and Siegestorm Siege Mode, the newer Kickstarter version of it, in terms of rules and things to expect. For one thing, in Siegestorm, the original version, basically your resource stack, which is the card stack you draw from, which represents essentially sort of your life, and if you run out, you're dead, it's over. It was represented, instead of having just one stack, there were 3 equal-sized stacks, one after another, vertically, and basically as you ran out of one, you moved to the next, then moved to the next. But it was kind of a goofy mechanic. It was there, I guess, so you could sort of visually see the life of the enemy or your own draining along the way, but it was just a little odd and took up a lot of space. The casualties pile, which is where you put your discarded cards, in the original game was designed to be face down. In the new game, it is face up. As I mentioned, the battle zone, that track of Frontline, No Man's Land, and Frontline, was cards in the original, now boards in the new version. As I mentioned, attack and defense ratios from the original game are now called attack and defense values in the new game. The original game referred to starter and expanded decks for the green and white versions of that swirly symbol, whereas now it's referred to as starter, base, and then the expansion booster cards. The original game had you draw 4 cards at the beginning of the game to form your starting hand, and then on each turn you draw 2 cards. But the first player had to skip drawing cards entirely on their first turn. So the first player started with 4 cards, the second player wound up with 6. That has changed. Now, at the beginning of the game, you each draw 2 cards, and the first player on their turn only draws 1, whereas the second player draws the normal 2. So it's a difference of 3 versus 4, not 4 versus 6. As I mentioned, the extra turn is now part of the game steps. The heal ability works differently, as I mentioned. In the current version, as I mentioned a couple of times, you can have 4 copies of any soldier or veteran and 2 copies of any elite or champion. In the original game, it was simply limited to 4 of any card. The original game also did not have any maximum number of cards in your hand at any given time before you had to discard cards to your casualties pile. In the new game, your maximum hand size is 10. Lastly, before we end here, I'm not the only one psyched for Siegestorm. It has a vibrant online community, particularly on the Facebook group for Siegestorm Siege Mode. It has a lot of folks over there on Board Game Geek as well, although many of them are kind of split between the page for the original game and the new one because it's not the same page on Board Game Geek. But the numbers kind of speak well for the project. The original Kickstarter goal was simply to raise £5,000. They raised over £160,000. Not too shabby. It's not going to be for everyone because it is a card game, and it's definitely not as big a scale as most of the other stuff we see from Awaken Realms proper, like Nemesis or Tainted Grail. But it's a solid, fun game with some unique mechanics to it that are somewhat challenging but easy to dive into, and if you're into card games, I think you're going to like this one. Again, it is Siegestorm Siege Mode from Awaken Realms Lite, and yes, it will be hitting retail soon. just without the Kickstarter exclusives, though thankfully for later purchasers, there aren't really very many of those. We'll be back when I get that art book to show you a little bit more of Siegestorm.